In the last video, we were on verses 10 and 11, which proved to be two of the most difficult verses in all of the New Testament. We looked at this passage from a certain perspective last time, and now we want to look at it from another perspective. There is more than one way to approach this text, but first, let's read the text. The 7 heads of the beast. They are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he remains only a little while. So again, we have 5 kings who have died. The 6th king is presently reigning. And there's a 7th king coming who is only going to be with us for a little while. And then he says, as for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. So one of the 7 heads is revived and comes back to life, as we've seen in Revelation 13. This is a reference to the Emperor Nero. And we're not going to go through this again, but I just want to remind you of different perspectives in the last video. If you have not seen part 1 of this presentation, you need to see it. We looked at all the proposed views, not all of them, but many of them. Some that begin counting the 7 kings with Julius Caesar, others with Augustus, others with Caligula. There's always this question, do you include Galba, Otho, Vitellius, etc.? So we had this discussion last time. Again, if you haven't seen it, you want to see it. But there is another perspective on this, that we should be looking at world empires. We should be counting subsequent world empires. We should not be counting Roman kings. And so that's what we're going to consider in this video. The 7 heads are 7 kings. But then it says that the beast is the 8th king. Now this is difficult to work out in your mind because you have a beast with 7 heads, right? And now we learn that each one of the heads is considered the entire beast, right? So I mean, since we're thinking of political rulers, think of Donald Trump. If Donald Trump were to grow some additional heads and he had a total of 7 heads, and we were to say, yes, Donald Trump has 7 heads. However, each one of those heads is its own Donald Trump. Now that's essentially what we have here with the beast. The beast has 7 heads, but the head that comes back to life is being discussed as though it's the entire beast. Now, how does that work? And what are the implications of each head essentially being, an entire beast? The point is that the manifestation of the beast through one of its authoritative heads or earthly kings at any particular historical epoch is tantamount to the full presence of the beast itself. In other words, if each head is the full presence of the beast, well, what is the beast? The beast is a king, an antichrist king, and his empire. And if each head embodies an entire beast, well, then that means we may have a sequence of beast empires in history. Right? That is the logic of those who take this perspective. So some folks are not going to count Roman kings at all. They're going to count kings who are representative of great empires in biblical history. And if you take this approach to it, the obvious starting point would be Pharaoh of Egypt, because Abraham is called, and then you have Isaac, you have Jacob, and then the first empire to subjugate the people of God is Egypt, with 400 years of slavery. And of course, the children of Israel were in the land of Goshen. And then the next great biblical empire is Assyria with King Sennacherib, who comes and takes the 10 northern tribes of Israel away in 722 and takes them into exile. Then you have Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, who destroys the temple in 586 BC and takes the remaining 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, and takes them into exile. And then you have Cyrus of Persia, who allows those 2 tribes, Benjamin and Judah, to return home. The other 10 tribes remain lost. They never came back home. And then you have Alexander the Great, or perhaps Antiochus Epiphanes, representing the Greek Empire. And the reason why we can't say whether it's Alexander or Antiochus is because, I mean, first of all, Alexander is obviously the most well-known Greek king in history. However, from a biblical perspective, Antiochus Epiphanes is the one who desecrated the altar, um, causing the Jewish revolt. The Jews established their independence in 164 BC, and that whole event is celebrated in the holiday of Hanukkah. And so one of these kings would be representative of Greece. And then, of course, the Roman Empire. John says that number 6 is the one that is present when he writes. And whether you think of the representative king as Caesar Augustus or as Nero or Domitian, since both of those Roman kings are mentioned in the book of Revelation, is a question of debate. So then this leaves us with numbers 7 and 8. What would number 7 be? Is 7 a particular empire after Rome? Some of the folks who take this perspective will suggest that empire number 7 is the Islamic Ottoman Empire, which was a scourge on the Eastern Church for about a millennium, right? So very very difficult empire to contend with, and still, there are other options. Or instead of one empire, is number 7, because 7 is a number of completion, is it all empires after Rome, proceeding up to the final empire? And then number 8 is the final Antichrist and his empire at the expiration of history. Some folks will say that this gets us out of this business where we don't know whether to start counting with Julius Caesar or Caesar Augustus, whether we should include Galba, Otho, and Vitellius. They'll say that's not the point. The point is not to speculate about Roman emperors. Each one of these heads amounts to the full presence of the beast. And so what we have here are a sequence of beast empires and their representative kings. One of the reasons this option is viable is because something similar seems to have been done in John's Gospel. John wrote the Gospel and he wrote the book of Revelation. Many will suggest that they don't have the same author, but I think they do. And if they don't have the same author, they at least come from the same milieu. They at least come from Johannine Christianity. There's a lot in common between Revelation and John's Gospel. And this is a good example because in Revelation, it said that 5 kings have fallen and the 6th one presently is. Well, this counting of 5 in the past and the 6th one in the present is something that takes place in John chapter 4, where Jesus has a discussion with the Samaritan woman. Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come here." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband.' For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true." Now, why is this significant for us? Well, first of all, we have to recognize that John's Gospel is highly symbolic. John scholars deal with this all the time, how this is the most symbolic out of the 4 Gospels. And at the same time, it is also historical. Right? When you think of the characters in it, Jesus, Mary Magdalene, Mary, mother of Jesus, Thomas, etc., Caiaphas, these are real people who had a real historical interchange with Jesus and with each other, etc. At the same time, the gospel is highly symbolic. So oftentimes a character like Thomas or a character like Mary will represent a certain type of disciple or a certain category of people. And there's always this debate in the historical Jesus research as to when a gospel is being more historical or whether it's being more symbolic. And that's not a discussion that I'm prepared to engage here, and I don't need to. The point is that of all 4 Gospels, John is the most highly symbolic. Yes, it is historical, but the story is told in such a way that each person and each character, or events like when it's dark and one of the Sanhedrin come to Jesus, the darkness in that passage is highly symbolic. I mean, there's just a lot of symbolism in this gospel. Now, why does that matter? Well, Jesus is having a conversation with the Samaritan woman at the well. And in Israelite culture and the Bible, the well is where one finds a wife. Right? So there is a type of a symbolic clue here as to what's going on. Now remember, Rebekah is discovered at a well in Genesis before she is married to Isaac. Moses meets and rescues his wife at a well in Exodus 2:15. And well language occurs in the Song of Songs, which of course is a marriage song. a very erotic marriage song in places. And so uh, it says that the disciples, when they saw Jesus speaking to the woman, they were very surprised. Well, uh, yeah, I mean, it's surprising that a man just went up and started talking to a woman whom he didn't know in ancient Israel. That is, that would raise a few eyebrows. But the fact that he did so at the well, the traditional spot for taking a bride, would be even more scandalous to an observer in the first century period. What is the meaning here? Jesus represents Yahweh, and the woman represents unfaithful Israel. Uh, John's Gospel has what we would consider to be a very high Christology, meaning that Jesus is divine, and he's discussed as though he is divine. He is the embodiment of Israel's God. This is why Thomas looks at him and says, "My Lord and my God." This uh, blatant association between Jesus and divinity means that Jesus is oftentimes representative of God himself in this gospel. Now, throughout the Old Testament, and we talked about this in the last video, uh, Israel is oftentimes presented as an unfaithful wife or as sort of a loose woman. You see this in Ezekiel 16, you see it in Habakkuk, etc., that Israel is an unfaithful bride who commits prostitution or adultery against Yahweh when she goes and pursues other gods, other husbands. And it seems here in John's Gospel that's what's taking place here, because this woman has sort of a checkered marital history. She's had 5 husbands, and she's with somebody right now who is not her husband, right? He's like a live-in boyfriend or something. And so she is this woman at a well, and she represents unfaithful Israel, according to some interpreters, while Jesus represents Yahweh, coming for Israel, his unfaithful bride. Now, again, Rome would be the 6th kingdom that Israel has been unfaithful with. That's why you have 5 in the past and 1 in the present. According to this line of interpretation, each one of her husbands represents one of these empires that Israel went a whoring after, one of these empires where Israel compromised through idolatry, through worshiping the gods of those empires, and through acclimating to the culture. And so, 5 empires that begins with Egypt and goes through to Greece, and then number 6, the present one, would be the empire. Now he says the one you now have is not your husband. Now that is, has been understood as being a slight against Rome. In other words, Egypt, um, Assyria, Babylon, etc. That wasn't a good deal, but at least they were legitimate husbands. A way of saying the 6th one, the one you now have, is not your husband. Some have seen this as a slight, as sort of a disrespectful remark against Rome, an empire that was so oppressive towards God's people. Now, this has been, again, compared to this statement that the beast was, it is not. Remember that from the last video, the statement that the beast is not is, again, a mockery of the beast, because the beast claims to be divine, he wants to be God, and God is the great I am. He is the one who was, who is, and who is coming. Yahweh always is. He always is there, and he is always faithful to his promises. But the beast is described as the one who is not, right? Because he is not Yahweh. He is not the great I am. And so you have these combination of elements that makes this passage in Revelation comparable to John chapter 4. You have 5 in the past, the 6th one is present, and you have this language of slight or insult when you talk about the one who is not. All right, the beast is the one who is not. This husband that she is with is not actually a husband at all. He's just a boyfriend. He's not even a legitimate husband. So some people will take this track. They will count up world empires, and of those who count up world empires, sometimes they will make this connection to John chapter 4. So I just wanted to I mean, this is, it's tentative, maybe, maybe not, but I at least wanted to bring this to your attention. Now, some folks are not going to do either one of these. They're not going to count up empires, and they're not going to count up Roman kings either. Those who interpret this list symbolically or as partially symbolic call on the Hebrew idiom known as the graded numerical saying. Now, the truth is, all of these have been symbolic interpretations. What we're talking about here are those who view this passage as symbolic, but in an even more loose sense. All right, they'll say that, it's not 7 consecutive empires, it's not 7 consecutive kings, it's just 7 because 7 is the number of completeness, or 6 because 6 is, the number of sin or the number of man, etc. Uh, those types of people who view this as just very loose metaphor, the symbolic association with numbers. Many of them will call on the graded numerical saying. This device uses 2 consecutive numbers in parallel to indicate something that is representative rather than literally exhaustive. And I'm sure that makes no sense at all, so let's look at a few examples. Remember this passage in Proverbs. There are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. Now, when the author says there are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to the Lord, this is his way of saying this is not an exhaustive list. That is, there is not exactly 6 or 7 things that the Lord hates instead of 8 or instead of 5, right? Saying 6, no, 7 is a way of saying this list is representative of the types of things that God hates. This is not an exhaustive list of everything he hates. It is representative of the sorts of behaviors that God hates. Another example in Ecclesiastes, cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. Now, this is not saying that you must literally give a portion to either 7 or 8 individuals and never 6 and never 9. All right? Again, it's representative. Micah 5:5, and he will be our peace when the Assyrians invade our land and march through our fortresses. We will raise against them 7 shepherds, even 8 commanders. All right, so this is the graded numerical saying. It's a way of saying, it's just representative. So when you get to Revelation and it says 7 kings, no, wait a minute, 8 kings. Some are going to say that it doesn't literally have to be 7 or 8. This is just a representative list. Bill says John's primary intent in this passage is not to count kings, such as Roman emperors, since if John did begin a count, we cannot even be sure with what emperor he would have begun. 5 simply shows how many human governments have come and gone. 6 is the number of man and serves well to indicate the present activity of the beast in any generation. All right, so you see what he's done. 5 is just a good number for everything that has come and gone. 6 is a good number because it's an incomplete number. It's a number of man, and it presents the activity of the beast in any generation. Right? It's not about counting up to John's day and go, oh, well, that's number 6, and only his generation is number 6. It's a representative number. Bauckham says, in fact, we should not have expected to be able to use this text to identify the emperor in whose reign Revelation was written. It was never designed to be so used. Revelation's first readers knew perfectly well who the 6th head, the reigning emperor, was, and did not need to work it out. They did not need to know where to start counting the sequence of 7 from the beginning, and would hardly be interested in doing so. Even John did not need to discover that there were to be 7 emperors by counting them. He knew there had to be 7 because that is the number of completeness. All right, so you see here, the numbers in this view just carry certain associations, and you don't really push it any further than that. Now, why then would it culminate with 8? Right? 8 represented the 8th day of new creation, or the eternal kingdom of Christ for early Christians. Right? The fact that Noah could be called the 8th, along with his 7 relatives in the ark, was seen as significant for this reason. Emerging from the ark into the new post-flood world It was a type of the new creation after the last judgment. All right, remember that in 2 Peter, when Peter is building up to a talk about new creation, he specifically mentions Noah and that there were 8 persons on board. It seems like Noah's story in particular came to be associated with new creation for obvious reasons, but there are 8 people on the ark, and so 8 got associated with new creation as well. There's also this thing that we'll see here in a moment when we look at some other passages. The old creation was made in 7 days, according to Genesis 1. So the 8th day became a way of referring to the anticipated new creation, right? 7 days for the old creation, and the 8th day is the new creation that will go on forever and ever. For example, in the early Christian text in the 2nd century, the letter of Barnabas says that God will usher in the 8th day the commencement of a new world. Now, this builds on the type of logic that we have found in old Jewish texts like Enoch, where it says, "And I appointed the 8th day also, that the 8th day should be the first created after my work, and that the first 7 revolve in the form of 7,000. That is 7,000 years. All right, this author thinks that there will be 7,000 years of world history. Each creation day comprises 1,000 years. And that at the beginning of the 8,000, there should be a time of not counting, endless, with neither years, nor months, nor weeks, nor days, nor hours. In other words, you have 7 days to comprise the 7,000 years of this history, of this world. And then the 8th day is not actually 1,000 years. That's just the beginning of eternity. And so 8, on the ark, the 8th day of creation, all of these things, made 8 a good number to represent eternity in ancient Judaism and in early Christianity. And so when you have 8 here in this text, that is probably meaningful. Bauckham says, as we have noticed, the number 666 is a double triangle, right? So, if you didn't see the presentation on Revelation 13 and the way the numbers work, I suggest you look at that. Revelation is comprised of triangular, square, and rectangular numbers. Triangular numbers are evil, square numbers are righteous, and rectangular numbers are a combination of the two. And we have this rare instance of doubly triangular numbers, and 666 was one of these rare numbers. If a triangular number is bad, a doubly triangular number is really bad, right? So 36 is the triangle of 666, and then 8 is the triangle of 36. Now, y is the number of the beast, clearly an evil number, doubly triangular, but its ultimate base in the mathematics that has pervaded this book goes back to the number of the eternal reign of Christ under the new creation. 8 is the number of new creation after the coming of Christ. It's the numerical root of 666 because the beast paradizes the coming of Christ by reigning on the earth. But when the beast does come, he goes to destruction. Now, we've seen this whole book is based on satanic counterfeits, right? Whatever God does, Satan has a counterfeit version. This is why back in Revelation 13, the beast had a counterfeit version of the death of Christ. He had a counterfeit version of resurrection. He has his own witness. The way that the church is supposed to be a witness, he has his own witness. The way that the apostles were performing signs and wonders, he has a false prophet to perform signs and wonders. He is always paradising, always distorting what God has done. And so what we find here in Revelation 17 with this number of 8 in association with the kingdom of the beast is that this, again, is a parody. 8 became the number for the eternal reign of Christ on the new earth. And so this number is associated with the beast because he also reigns on the earth in his attempt to be Christ, his attempt to be like the Messiah. And it's interesting because we only have 2 passages in Revelation that really analyze the beast. Revelation 13, Revelation 17. In Revelation 13, we get the number 666. In Revelation 17, we get the number 8. Well, in the triangular mathematics that has been associated with evil in this book, as it turns out 666 and 8 are connected. 36 is the triangle of 666, and then 8 is the triangle of 36. Again, I suggest, if you haven't seen it, that you watch earlier videos so that you will know about this type of math. Go back and watch the video on the mark of the beast. All right, and so there is definitely a connection here, something going on, and it probably has to do with counterfeiting the kingdom of Christ. 8 is the number of the reign of Christ, and so here it is associated with the beast so that he can counterfeit what Christ has done. At this point, we're reminded of the curious circumstance that the numerical value of Jesus in Greek, Jesus, is 888. So, if you were going to be a counterfeit version of Christ, this number is a good one to show up in your computation. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. And the angel said to me, the waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked, and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. 10 kings. Now, it's important to point out that John speaks of these kings as not yet on the scene. Fulfillment is not absolutely imminent in John's time. Now, the reason I say this is, again, the temporal argument. There are some who suggest that all of Revelation's meaning is wrapped up in the first century, and that it does not have meaning, and it does not contain predictions that exceed beyond the first century. And on the other side of this, you will have the fundamentalists, the dispensationalists, the people who think that one day the rapture will occur, and then you have 7 years of conflict between the Antichrist and the Jewish people. And they think the book of Revelation is written only about that 7-year period of tribulation, and it doesn't have anything to say about church history, doesn't really have much to say about the time in which John lives. Both of these two extremes are wrong. As we've seen, the book of Revelation is a book of past, present, and future fulfillment. And the passage we're at is a good one for seeing this. There are 5 kings that have already fallen, one that presently is, and then the 7th and the 8th are yet to come. Right there, you have an element of past, present, and future. So associating Revelation only with the first century or only with the future is a huge mistake. However, it is interesting that at this point, these 10 kings are future from John's perspective, while the 7 heads of the beast represent kings or kingdoms that rule in sequence, one after the other. These 10 are all at once, and they're all future. They are those who will reign with the final beast just prior to the second coming of Christ. That says the king's reign is going to last 1 hour. Again, this echoes the passage back in Daniel where King Nebuchadnezzar becomes like a beast under God's judgment. And that word 1 hour is used in the Greek Old Testament as a reference to this period where Nebuchadnezzar was reduced to the level of an animal. Now, using this same language here of these kings is likely a way of saying the same thing about them by being in cahoots with the beast, by participating with him, by submitting to him, by giving their power to him. They also have forfeited their humanity in order to reign with the beast and to persecute the church. Now, in the year 1970, Hal Lindsey published his book, The Late Great Planet Earth, which in a period of 12 years sold 15 million copies, obviously demonstrating what a huge hit this type of thinking was with Christian evangelicals at the time. And this book went through the book of Daniel and Revelation and interpreted the whole thing in light of uh, political circumstances that were immediately imminent in the 1970s. He imagined that the second coming was almost immediately and that Bible prophecy had not been fulfilled in history, that it was just all being fulfilled in his time. And he had a very literal way of reading the book of Revelation, as these folks oftentimes do. Now, because there were 10 horns, he did not see this as a representative number. He saw this as meaning there must be exactly 10 of something. And so what he understood was that the European Common Market, which later became the European Union, had to have exactly 10 members, and that Europe would be the context out of which the beast would spring. And this idea has been around a long time. Very popular idea in the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. I think there are still folks around who believe this idea. The notion that the Antichrist is going to come from an Islamic milieu is becoming more popular on the popular level, but this idea that he must necessarily be European is still around as well. And the problem for Hal Lindsey was when the European Union did have 10 members, it just kept getting more members until it eventually went up to a 28 members. And of course, since they're reading it literally, soon after, they shifted gears and suggested, well, when the United Nations Security Council has 10 nations instead of the 5 that it presently has, when it has 10 member nations, well, that will be the context that generates the beast. Now, the problems here are numerous, but 10, as we have seen, is a triangular number, and it is a representative number for the evil rulers who align themselves with the beast. And you should not read this so literally as to think that there must be exactly 10 members in his cabinet and not 11, or exactly 10 nations in the European Union, or exactly 10 nations in the United States Security Council. We have seen time and time again in this book that numbers are not used that literally. The numbers have a lot of meaning, they're important, but they're not literal like that. The numbers are representative in a very thematic way, not in a literal way. They will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those with him are called and chosen and faithful. And the angel said to me, the waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. The kings and the waters. Now, this answers the question of Revelation 13, who can make war against the beast? Back in Revelation 13, we saw that an Old Testament formula had been taken away from Yahweh and applied to the beast. I mean, in the Old Testament writers, they say all the time, who can fight against the Lord? Who can fight against Yahweh? And the idolaters of Revelation 13 were looking at the beast, and they were looking at his military, his national military, and they were saying, who can fight against the beast? They were talking about him like he was God, as people oftentimes do when they marvel at the military power of their own country. Oftentimes people in a stroke of patriotism will talk about their own country's military forces as though they are invincible, as though they are unbeatable, etc. And it's interesting that Revelation 13 counts this as a type of blasphemy, that Yahweh alone is invincible. Yahweh alone is the one with whom no one can make war. And so the question was asked, who can make war against the beast? Well, now we learn that it's the Lamb. The Lamb makes war against the beast, and he conquers him. The statement that they will make war against the Lamb and the Lamb will overcome them is an adaptation of Daniel 7, which says that the horn was making war with the saints and overpowered them. Remember, so much of this language comes from Daniel, and in Daniel 7 you have a beast with a little horn, and the horn makes war against God's people and conquers them. We've seen this also again in Revelation 13, that the beast makes war with God's people and conquers them. And so there's a sense of poetic justice that is always expressed in the book of Revelation. Think earlier that it says that they spilled the blood of saints and prophets, and therefore God has given them blood to drink. Or each nation that drinks of the passionate immorality of the prostitute will also have to drink the full cup of the fury of God's wrath. There's always this poetic type of justice where justice is served up against you in the same fashion that you served injustice out against others. And that's what's taking place here. The beast made war with the saints and conquered them. And so now the Lamb makes war with the beast and conquers him. The waters of peoples under the woman's spell, and the orators for the devil. Remember, back in Revelation 12, when the woman was on her journey in the wilderness, the serpent came and he spewed water, a river, out of his mouth to carry the woman away. And the river was a false river of life. Right? There are two rivers like that in this book. There's the river in Revelation 21 of life, and then there's the lie of the serpent. The serpent told Eve that she would not die, that she would live if she ate of the tree. And so she did, and she died. Well, in Revelation 12, he spits this false river of life after the woman again, because once again, he's trying to deceive her. He's trying to slay her into believing she can be disobedient and still live. But this is not the case. And so these waters, these people with deceitful teachings and false teachings that take people away from the gospel, they were used by the devil against the woman in Revelation 12 unsuccessfully, because God's church will never be so corrupt that it perishes from the earth. Right? We should have a high view of the church, not a low view. And now we see that this woman sits by or upon the waters because she is at home with false teaching. She is comfortable with it. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked, and devour her flesh, and burn her up with fire. This is Jezebel language. Remember the death of Jezebel back in 2 Kings chapter 9, where Jehu finally gets a hold of her. Or rather, he has some other people take hold of her and chunk her out a window. Then he, that is Jehu, lifted up his face to the window and said, "Who is on my side? Who?" And 2 or 3 officials looked down at him. He said, "Throw her down." So they threw her down, and some of her blood was sprinkled on the wall and on the horses, and he trampled her. When he came in, he ate and drank, and said, "See now to this cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter." All right. To be left unburied is the ultimate indignity in the ancient world. And though he didn't care much for her, just because she was royalty, he was going to give her the dignity of burial, even though he'd thrown her down and already ran over her with his chariot. They went to bury her, but they found nothing more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. Now this is because dogs had eaten her body. This is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite, saying, "In the property of Jezreel, the dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel." Now you can see here in Hebrew, there would be a rhyme, a wordplay, Jezreel, Jezebel. And so that explains some of the imagery here. This woman is stripped and eaten. Right? It says the beast and the kings will devour her flesh. That is because she is Jezebel. She is like the woman back in Revelation chapter 2, who was spreading false teaching and a corrupting influence in the church. And this woman was doing the same thing. This great city, this socioeconomic center, which used her influence to enslave the whole world, and including to corrupt Christians, to corrupt the church. Some of the other language also comes from Nineveh, because Nineveh was a violent nation. all because of the many harlotries of the harlot, the charming one, the mistress of sorceries, who sells nations by her harlotries and families by her sorceries. Behold, I am against you, declares the Lord of hosts, and I will lift up your skirt over your face and show to the world your nakedness and to the kingdoms your disgrace. Now, in the context, spoiling nations with violence is what Nineveh is guilty of. You know, there are all these phrases in the chapter: woe to the bloody city, completely full of lies and pillage. Uh, you know, Swords are flashing, spears gleaming, many slain, a mass of corpses, countless dead bodies. All right, so Nineveh uh, would use violence against all sorts of nations, all sorts of peoples, and would take their plunder and sell it, or take people as slaves and sell them. Now, it's interesting what's taking place here in the book of Nahum. We usually have two different types of language. We have the language of pimps. The pimp is the one who sells the prostitute. And then we have the language of the prostitute, the woman who sells herself. But in Nahum's language, these two categories have been conflated. All right. If you sell yourself, you are involved in prostitution. If you sell someone else, you are involved in prostitution. It's not two different categories, pimping and prostitution. They have been conflated into the same one. And so when this woman sells other countries and sells families as slaves whom she is enslaved with her violence, this is harlotry. And Mystery Babylon was a prostitute in the same sense, in the sense that she pimped, in other words, she sold others whom she had enslaved with violence. The beast kills the prostitute. Now, Daniel chapter 2 predicts that the final end time kingdom will divide against itself. In Revelation, it seems that the military arm, that is the beast, has lashed out against the economic and religious center of the kingdom, that is the woman. And so this is the sense in which the kingdom divides against itself in Daniel. The political arm will destroy the economic and religious center of the kingdom in some sort of a civil war. Now, in ancient Roman times, Civilis in Batavia, which is what we would call the Netherlands, he understands how empires really enslave people. Empires really enslave people, yes, with violence, but more than that, with entertainment and gifts. Right? He says, away with those pleasures which give the Romans more power over their subjects than their arms bestow. Romans came in with a culture of theater and circuses and horse racing and chariot racing and athletics and all sorts of things to pacify the people. Yes, the Romans had to be powerful in a military sense, but they really knew that the way you enslave people was through entertainment and was through handouts and generosity, building roads, and especially a culture of entertainment. And this is still extremely deadly for modern day Christians, especially in the age of television and video games. You know, the average American watches 5 hours of television a day, right? That's 35 hours a week. Now, the average 65-year-old American has spent 9 years watching TV, and that's not 9 years, with sleeping time built into the 9 years, right? That's 9 years. By the time you're 65, the average American has spent 9 years watching TV. Now, imagine if you spent 35 hours a week serving Christ. I mean, that's the sort of person who's such a presence that they completely transform a room when they walk into it. Someone who's so devoted to Christ. They serve him 35 hours a week. Now, think how many Christians are going to die. And they're going to find out that the total number of hours they spent serving Christ in life is nowhere near the total number of hours that they spent watching television. 5 hours a day, the average American. And it's crazy how a culture of entertainment strangles our Christian commitments. This is nothing new. Osborne reminds us that Rome did not face anything like the imminent attack by its vassal kings, which is described in this passage. So again, folks who want this all to be fulfilled in the first century, they have a problem. All right, Rome did not fall like this. Its vassal kings did not turn on Rome and burn the city. The city fell to foreign invaders. It fell to the Visigoths. Also Jerusalem. A lot of folks want the prostitute here to be Jerusalem of the first century, but Jerusalem did not have control over the whole world the way that Mystery Babylon does here. And so this is just one of those things that's future, right? You can't cite this as fulfilled in the first century. Rome did not fall like this. Jerusalem does not match the description, and it didn't fall by vassal kings anyway. Its superiors came in and wiped it out, right? And so this is a reference to the beast empire prior to the second coming of Christ. It's going to, before Christ ever comes back and issues judgment, it's already going to be fragmented. The religious and economic center will already have been destroyed by the military arm of the beast empire. For God has put it in their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. Now there is a long strain running through the Old Testament that works this way, where God takes a wicked nation, gives it power, gives it military power, and he uses it like a stick to scourge the wicked or to scourge his own people when they have been disobedient. And after he is done with that stick, he breaks it over his knee and throws it away. Right? A good example of this is the nation of Babylon in the book Habakkuk. The prophet Habakkuk does not like the fact that God is this way. That's why he says, "Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? O Lord, you have ordained them," that is the Babylonians, "as a judgment, and you, O Rock, have established them for correction." Right? He does not understand why God empowers wicked countries to be a scourge, to be God's judgment against those against whom God deems judgment is appropriate. Right? And when God responds, he does not relent. He does not call back the Babylonians. He just simply reminds Habakkuk that the Babylonians' time is coming. They will be destroyed as well. As it says to Babylon here, "Because you have plundered many nations, all the remnant of the people shall plunder you. For the blood of man and the violence to the earth, to cities and all who dwell in them." So God is going to use Babylon to punish Israel, not because Babylon is good, not because they deserve it, but because when he is done with them, he's just going to take them like a stick, break them over his knee, and throw them away. Now, this is what God does. This is why wicked nations have so much power in history, because God uses them, and then he punishes them, then he judges them. In the last Republican debate, the nominees were asked by the Fox News anchor, "What do you think the role of God is in modern America?" And I thought, well, this is going to be really interesting. And like clockwork, they went around and they all basically said the same thing, that God has empowered America to be a force for good in the world. And in the discussion, the notion of being a force for good, they meant literally a force, that we are justice, that we essentially, we're a righteous nation, and we punish those whom God wants to be punished, and we fall on the right side of things, and that's why God has empowered us militarily to be superior to other nations. I thought it was very interesting because there's not really a biblical model for that. God did not empower Israel to be the world's policeman. Yeah, they went in and removed the Canaanites because they had to inhabit their land, but Israel was never empowered with military strength so that they could go around the world and judge the wicked. The church, suddenly, especially in the New Testament, was not empowered in this fashion. The biblical model is that God uses pagan kings, and he uses pagan and wicked nations to punish other countries. And then when he is done, he breaks them like a stick over his knee. This notion that God is going to raise up a Christian country, supply it with lots of bombs and tanks and planes, and that their role in the world is to go out and beat up on the evil, Uh, this is just not the biblical model. Yes, God does that sort of thing throughout biblical history, Old and New Testaments. We see it in Romans 13. We see it here in Revelation 17. We see it all throughout the Old Testament. But it's never the righteous, right? In our age, the job of the righteous is not to pick up the sword and go out and slay the wicked. Our job is to be a Sermon on the Mount people, obey the Sermon on the Mount. But God will always use the pagan national powers to be his sword of judgment. That's their job. That is not our job as Christians. And this idea that exists in conservative American Christian politics, that America is an intrinsically Christian country, and that God has armed us uh, to be a force of justice against the wicked, has no biblical merit. Right? God does not call the righteous to be the world's policeman. God consistently uses the pagan countries to be the world's policeman, and then he throws them away for the injustices that they committed along the way.